There are many surprises in Gunfire Games Remnant 2 that I don't even know where to start, but I'm just going to jump in anyway, because like the game itself, I'll figure it out at some point. Like the procedural generation in games, are you tired of the same sponsors in each video? Me too. My sponsor's me, my brand is ACG, and that's it. Subscribe and hit notify all if you want to see more videos on games. Remnant 2. First, the story. Let me break this prologue down for you. Remnant wastes no time in telling you something. First, you're traveling with a girl who's a mysterious infection, but she's fighting it off. Set up a lot like The Last of Us, only there's more. You see, in this world, there's a multi-dimensional overlap, and it allows something called the Rot into the world. Remnant 2 tells a tale of men and women still around fighting the Remnant. You leap into some sewers to fight a bunch of skeleton dogs, but get stabbed in the heart. Luckily, you're healed when a guy created in the same generator you were holds a fiery testicle against your head. Then another character created in the same generator blows up the skeleton dogs, and before you know it, you fight a super pissy tree. Now, simply the best of friends, they decide to take you to their stronghold, Ward 13. Diabolical name aside, it's obviously a pretty cheery place because they don't lock the door on the front. You meet the leader, Ford, who thinks you're destined for something great, so he takes you to the world's biggest barbecue with a giant charcoal briquette that kidnaps the girl with a water spell. You keep yelling at yourself not to follow him, and then you do. That's the story. Done. What'll happen to our heroes next? Well, that's going to be up to you because it's character picking time. You pick from a couple classes, the Medic, Handler, Challenger, and Hunter, and Gunslinger as a pre-order bonus if you have it. Picking an archetype gives you a set of skills to unlock, and I'm going to break them down here. The Medic. He heals himself and others and starts with Wellspring. This slams down an area of effect healing spell. Later, you can also learn Healing Shield and Redemption, which heals down to allies and gives them some healing back, but also heals up those people who are still alive. His primary perk starts as Regenerator, which regenerates their own relic when healing others. Then you've got the Challenger, the up-close guy. He looks like he just got fired from the Excalibur Casino and only had time to steal like one helmet when being escorted out. He starts with War Stomp, which sends out a massive damage-dealing earth impact. He can also learn Juggernaut, which increases their movement and up-close attack and damage. And then lastly, Rampage. This increases fire rates, reload speeds, and movement, as well as stacks rage. And if you kill enemies that way and kill up to 10 of them, he basically recirculates Rampage all over again and reloads his weapons just for fun. Also, the first time he goes down, he actually doesn't and resurrects himself. If you like it up close and dirty, that's a guy for you. Then you have Hunter, like Vasily from Enemy at the Gates. He has Hunter's Mark, which increases crit damage and marks all enemies nearby, and also increases all attacks against them. He can also learn Hunter's Focus, which marks enemies that he aims, and the longer he aims down, the tighter the spread on the shot goes, and gives weak spot damages and bonuses to crit as well. And then Hunter's Shroud, which hides him from the enemies or makes him harder to see, but also when you leave the shroud, it marks enemies nearby and increases range and close attacks to them. He also extends the duration of the active skill when shooting enemies' weak spots. While they can all do long range, he's the one you want if that's how you want to start out. And then you have the Handler, basically Will Smith from I Am Legend. And he learns 3 stances. The first is Guard Dog, which increases threat and damage is reduced against you. If you press it once, the dog will also go and attack the enemies nearby. If you double press it, they'll return to you. And if you hold it, it reduces damage to you and allies close by. And it also adds threat on the dog to pull off some enemies. Then you can learn Support Dog, which constantly heals everyone nearby, and his howl adds max heal and faster movement speed to nearby allies. And lastly, Attack Dog Stance, which causes the dog to do 20% more damage, and holding it down increases everyone's nearby damage. His perk is that when he goes down, the dog can actually try to heal him. I say try because I'll get to that in a bit. Lastly, Gunslinger, Doc Holliday from Tombstone. If he didn't have TB, he has a quick draw for 6 critical hits to the enemy and double stagger value, or you can hold it down to take 1 huge aimed shot. He also can learn Sidewinder, which increases aim down sight speed and weapon swap speeds, as well as reloading firearms that you cycle. Lastly, he learns Bullet Storm, which increases fire rate and reload speeds, and any single shot weapon he has becomes just fully automatic. And if you kill an enemy with it, it reloads the weapon. His perk is that reactivating a Gunslinger skill reloads both the guns and gives you infinite ammo for a small amount of time. Now, before you stress deciding which one to get, especially playing alone, at the beginning of the game, you get 1 single mod for a gun. Mods are attached to the weapons and can be moved around at will. This is very intelligent because each of the starting mods in some way alleviates a bit of the worry about not having a particular skill. Lastly, there's a series of traits. Everyone starts with typical ones like endurance and the ability to level up mod powers faster. But as you explore, you're going to find hidden ones, mutators, traits, and others that I was able to construct weapons with on one character in the game and didn't even see it with the other. And that makes continued forays into the danger all the more important and honestly interesting, because the story really isn't. Remnant sends you out into the world to track down Clementine, that kidnapped ward member. So the first time you head out, you roll the realms, and each one of those biomes can change. For example, you might have a forest or a floating Pandora-style biome or a tomb biome in the same realm, including starting realms like a creepy Mass Effect-like planet or corrupted medieval village, each again with their own different setups there as well. So you roll it and you might have a completely different medieval village than somebody else has, or a completely different setup for a planet. The game also picks and places the stories and side quests it will tell you as you do this. So you can get Inca-style temples and massive dark fae-looking guardians telling you stories about ancient gods, which may also have different bosses telling you different parts of the overall world's mythos and history. And that's the juice to Remnant. However, the big improvement to this game is that the shooting feels cleaner than the original. Smoother isn't really a good descriptor, but that is what it is. Remnant 2 feels more accurate, almost like the hitboxes feel cleaned up a bit. Everything feels a bit quicker, more reactive to your inputs. But you have to watch out because every character has their own basic stats, and one of them is weight. So like a Dark Souls style character, this directly affects dodge roll speed. So each bit of armor counts against that. But armor has its resistances, basic bonuses as well, that need to be tracked, because one biome could have a large number of enemies who can poison, while another might be based around electricity. And then if you decide to re-roll the realm just because you wanted to explore somewhere else, you might go into the same place, but those are switched around. Each section of the biome is built out for you to track down enemies and to get to the next crystal to save your progress, as well as open a teleportation spot to get back to the old locations. Battle makeup depends on the enemies, with flying enemies zooming in to rake you with claws from behind, rock enemies surprising you by tearing themselves out of the stone walls beside you and then just sprinting towards you, or crazy people in medieval villages being crazy, and others in later sections. Plunder thumping your way through alien land, smashing every enemy that creeps, crawls, catapults, and careens towards you. Feels much better than the original. Even the up-close weapons smashing and slashing combos just feel better. And while you're consistently balancing stamina and weight and your ability to fire guns and reloads and mutators and modifiers, it's really the enemies and the levels that are going to make a game. Let's talk about the levels for a second. Procedural generation is very difficult to pull off, and Remnant 2, with its realms, each with different biomes and setups as well as totally different bosses, can keep you guessing. However, the level designs themselves, the actual exploring part, is a bit hit and miss, because it feels like a lot of the spots were built by the Mad Hatter. Stairwells that can go anywhere, forested areas that just funnel you through the same central part without really any real variation. Or more importantly, a feeling of progression through a location. While everything should probably have a bit of a Mountains of Madness feel to it because of the story, regardless of that, each location that you go to can feel a little bit as described, as a odd lack of progression, like the pieces are just set there and very little rhyme or reason. If you just hammer in with guns blazing and run around, you probably won't notice. That is balanced against a number of secret items and treasures laying around for you to explore, and of course just one more mini-boss to take it out on. And whenever you're tired, there's usually a crystal nearby to park your ass at and go back to camp. Now, when you go back after each battle, you get to see what special weapon or weapon mod you can build. That's actually very exciting. The game has a ton of items strewn around those locations, and each one of the bosses usually drops something very useful. There's a little bit less use to some of the smaller systems, though. For instance, you can trade in runic dust to get these fragments. They attach to your heart, and you can level them up as well, but they're the very typical 1.2334 plus to movement kind of bits. Once they hit level 10, they can add a considerable amount of power, but the pull to talk to one more merchant just to see it go from 1.34 to 1.45 isn't all it's cracked up to be. Where upgrading weapons, though, is nicely handled, with most of them getting noticeable damage improvements each level that actually makes you feel it the moment you go back to battle. Guns being set easily to understanding categories usually means figuring out what amulet versus ring versus a mod that you want isn't very difficult, and special builds or jack-of-all-trades builds can be put together pretty quickly, especially on the run or if friends jump in. Let's talk about friends, if you have any. While many games shine in multiplayer, I actually found solo to be super enjoyable in this game versus the original. If you want to leap in with friends here, you can do so, and that synergy is incredible. For example, the dog sticks around even if the handler dies, and you can heal your pal in combat. There's no real technical details that you can find, unfortunately, when it comes to connection, like ping. I would have liked to have seen that. But mixed games with European and US players were seamless, with no legs or stutter, and one rubber band on a single elevator. Seamlessly leaping into each other's games can be done without any real hassle. I spent about 25 hours just in co-op with zero losses of connection or issues with travel. Also, both players can explore most of the location that you're in, wherever you are, at least as far as we could test. Remnant's strength is that playing alone, you can feel powerful, and playing in groups more so, but also useful to each other. Enough perks work in combination with each other that there's these excellent and very fun combinations. However, we do got to talk about the AI. It is bog standard for this kind of game. Some of the enemies have quick dodges, especially against the first strike, which can throw you off, and it does a good job keeping you on your feet, while flying enemies can grab you and fly off with you, throwing you to the ground, instant killing you if you're too far up. That mixes the magic here, and it works in tandem. Unfortunately, the Canine's AI for the handler is terrible. It'll try to heal you standing in a pool of acid, and it has like 1 hit point. So if you like watching dogs die, choose that. But if you don't, choose it anyway, because still, it's absolutely incredible to watch and play with the dog. It is just so enjoyable sending him to howl, then cause your entire group to heal, then make him go out and attack an enemy to slow him down as you reload. It feels like a true tag team, and if you do decide to go out on your own, that can really definitely help. The pet is truly useful, especially in a quick shooter like this where it could have fallen to the wayside. Speaking of fallen to the wayside, you may be wondering why I haven't talked about bosses. Let's do so with 2 examples. First, I have to point this out. I've faced none of the issues I had with Remnant's original titles, issues with bosses, which had a lot of ads that didn't make sense and really overall need a lot of balancing. Here, there's a much more deft-handed alternating between ads, special attacks, AoEs, as well as unique pieces that felt like they fit within the locations. One boss, a plant thing, was pretty terrible though. A combination of weird attacks, boring attacks, lackluster platforming needed during it, as well as that terrible canine AI, felt like a throwaway compared to many of the others. One of which was the height for me, was getting smashed by a bunch of pissed off alien Rubik's Cubes that initially I thought looked boring, but by the time I was done, I was actually deeply impressed by that boss battle. It was enjoyable and completely different than what I expected. Even though it was simplistic by nature, that's not what makes an amazing boss battle every time, is some type of inner complexity that just makes you continually work. This was a mix of a thought process as well as some determination of different random variables, and in addition, a lot of understanding patterns all combined into one. All of this wouldn't be worth experiencing if the presentation and performance weren't good. Now, presentation, I don't know what a world in full Armageddon mode looks like with dimensional travel, but I hope it looks like this. It's more colorful than the original by a good margin. Alien groves of creepy flowers, ancient crooked and crannied tombs to explore, and some wicked later locations that feel like they took some inspiration from locations in other games, but built on it. They look good almost all the time. A lot of special effects, and the enemies also look very well done with different enemy types for each of those locations, and again, they can switch up depending on the biome. The best are massive 2-sword wielding dark face styled followers of a queen in this forested and tombed area. Their moves, their looks, their wicked armor, incredible. Same goes for you and your characters. Whether up close or at a distance, has a feeling of reuse, just like the fiction of an Armageddon would present. Texture-wise, the game is a little bit rough. You will certainly notice some low detail textures, and there was some LOD pop in that I noticed here and there. The levels themselves look good, throwing all kinds of effects around. There's poison billowing from fog in the aforementioned planetscape I talked about, and there's vistas you can see when climbing to the top of an old tomb on floating islands. I'm not sure why the characters you meet in the game, though, all look like generic characters from the character creator, which I got to admit is pretty neutered as a character creator. There are not that many options, and a lot of people are going to look the same. Just in our couple multiplayer sessions, we ended up getting 3 or 4 people that looked like, well, identical to each other. When it comes to the performance, I need this to be better. There are some patches headed our way, but at 4K, all settings and ultra with quality DLSS, the 4090 got from, well, 40 to 90 FPS. All coincidences aside, the big issue is the huge variability that can crop up in that FPS. At least you don't need a 4090 at lower resolutions, but that performance takes a massive hit in some spots where there's a ton of fog and smoke effects. Understandably, there's a lot going on in those spots, but they're the coolest looking locations, and I would have liked to have seen them shore that up. They have informed me that there is a patch for some DLSS bugs that are present, and that's usually the Death Stranding kind of weird blur that happens after some particles. Luckily, the game does have a good number of settings, including turning off one of the ugliest motion blur settings I have ever seen. It's worse than many others. I don't know why it looks so bad in this game. It could just be the presentation of the title itself. Turn that off right away, as we mostly always do. The opposite of ugly is beauty, beautiful, and that's Remnant 2's music. It is probably the best and most atmospheric music in a game in 2023, but more than that, it may be one of the favorites for me in the last couple years. It is majestic. It has this set of tracks exploring a planet side, hearing the sand and grit flitting around you, and then you have these horns and underlying synth rebounding underneath. It was far from what I expected in this game, and it is one hell of a mic drop musical moment that you experience. But that's not the only one. Take the main character creator, soft vocals and heroic horns that play when you're making your character, lending this unique feeling of promise in a game and a world that is very much the opposite. It has an entire atmosphere to it that I did not expect. Here's the kicker though. Heading to the ward for the first time, an unexpectedly old Western style guitar plays out with marching beats percussion under it that is wild. I can easily say the music kept me just as interested in the game as any other part did. It was like a Red Dead dimensional traveling post-apocalyptic moment. That's a mouthful. When it comes to the sound work, it's incredible. It has a good 3D separation, and the way they handle environmental audio creates this really fulfilling blanket of knowledge for the gamer. A lot of information floods into the headset or the speakers, directional audio cues, enemies landing on the dirt behind you, or the chirping of birds in a forest level that are cut to perfection as they fly away to indicate a bad guy's coming. Gunfire, explosions, magic are all handled with a very discreet ear towards making sure the player can identify direction and distance, and it seldom fails. As well as unique tones that play when larger enemies are summoned, there's this sense of foreboding that consistently plays out, and the sound work is one of the best parts of that. When it comes to the voice, this is overall just pretty good. There's a couple that really nail their parts, and then a couple others that sort of seem hit and miss. When it comes to vocals, there's also not a great amount. There are for the bosses who explain to you story and mythos moments, but for the main characters and some of the others, they just sort of pop in and out. Nothing bad there, but nothing that really nailed it. And lastly, let's talk about bugs. I had 6. That's about 1,007 less than the original game. I had a couple stutters here or there, and I would love to see the performance increased. I had 3 upgrades that I bought and just didn't seem to switch over to me, and I had 2 full crashes after very, very extended periods of time. Overall, while not perfectly smooth, this was a pleasant ride compared to the original, including those performance issues that I already mentioned. But Remnant 2 offers a lot. There's a ton there, and some of it, while not perfect, there is a great deal of enjoyment, and that's when we talk about the fun factor. In most all ways, Remnant 2 is more fun than the original. While the original had some really good ideas, it missed in a lot of different ways, and while later modes and patches were sort of put in, it was one of those games where every time you hear somebody say they liked it, it's probably followed by the inevitable, well, there's this one thing. Remnant 2 has the same. Performance isn't outstanding, and the levels could have had a better feel of connectedness. However, alone or in co-op, the game is just a blast to play. Able to later make huge adjustments to the archetypes, throwing many of your plans out the window as a big change happens later on, allows for you to look at everything and decide what you're going to merge. And then adventure mode unlocks. And if you want a shorter one-realm adventure, you can do that. There's also 4 different difficulties if you're finding it too easy. It's a great deal of content for this game. The best of all is that Remnant is a mixture, and re-rolling and changing all of the different stuff makes it truly feel like different experiences, where the first game tried, but it never really nailed that. So let's talk about the rating. What hits? This game has a lot of content, and it is quite enjoyable despite any little issues that may pop up. There's a couple systems in place that don't necessarily feel the greatest. There's a couple weapons that I got to admit I probably would never choose, but that's inevitable for almost any of these kind of games. Jumping in and co-op with others worked perfectly, but playing by yourself also did, even if you didn't want to do the handler. However, if you don't, you're probably just dead inside. What misses? For sure, the performance. There's definitely enough performance issues that I can see this being one of the major complaints. It is one of those games that, depending on the role of the realm, you may not have as many issues as somebody else does, simply because of how it's all put together. But another part that left me a bit cold inside were those side quests. The way the game is procedurally generated for the realms, there were some different locations where the side quests really just became rote. Go here, go back, go all the way, find some hint, and then go back again. There was a lot of back and forth travel that, even with the crystals and teleporting, just wasn't super interesting, and I think really does reflect, once again, on how levels are put together. My rating for this would be a buy. I highly enjoyed it. It was a blast to play despite any problems. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you do, click on some of the other videos that you're probably seeing right now on this thumb, and you can subscribe to the Patreon, or you can just hit subscribe here, hit notify all, Follow the channel. You'll see a bunch more videos for Starfield, some walking the walks, all kinds of crazy stuff. And if you want to play some D&D, stream some games with us, and enjoy great content, the Patreon is the place to be.